Hi, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today to give you an introduction to stranded colorwork knitting. This is a technique that allows you to create a multicolored pattern by knitting with two different colored strands of yarn at the same time. This is a technique that I use in many of my designs, and including this Genie colorwork version hat. A lot of my designs involve using colorwork while you're knitting in the round. And so in those patterns you will knit every single stitch, and if you're following a chart, you will always follow the chart from right to left for every single round. Today I'm going to demonstrate this technique on a flat sample. So I will show you how to deal with stranded colorwork on both the right side and the wrong side of your knitting, assuming that you want your colorwork on the right side to be entirely stockinette, which means that on the right side you're seeing only knit stitches. There are some terms in colorwork knitting that I just want to familiarize you with. Main color, or MC, usually refers to the color that is the background of your work. Frequently, this might be the color that you use when you cast on, or the color that you would consider the background or dominant color in your project. The contrasting color, which could be depicted as CC or C1, C2, C3, if there's multiple colors throughout the design, is usually, it indicates the contrasting color, which is the secondary or tertiary color of the work. And in this case, I will be using a dark blue as the contrasting color. So my pattern starts with having me knit 2 stitches in the main color. So I have not yet joined my second color, and I'm just going to knit 2. And now it's time to join and start knitting in colorwork. So I've got my second color, and I'm going to kind of hold the yarn behind the work. Oops. And hold it behind my work and kind of secure it behind this finger to hold it taut. And I am going to knit 2 stitches with my contrasting color, like so. And making sure that you keep a tension and a reasonable tension, I am now going to hold both colors in my left hand, and I'm now going to knit 2 stitches in the main color. And then, as you can see, since I'm following this chart, I now want to knit 2 stitches in the contrasting color. So you can see each time I'm knitting, I'm picking the color that I want to knit with, while making sure to leave it loose, the other color loose enough on the back so not to pull too tight. It takes a little while to get used to the tension when you're doing stranded color work, and different people have a different way that they like to do this. Some people will hold the yarns in different hands, but I like to hold them both in the same hand as I knit 2 with my main color, and then I knit 2 with the contrasting color. And you can even do this with more than 2 colors. You could do this with 3 or 4. It's just your yarns are more likely to get pretty tangled as you go. So I'm continuing this knit 2 in one color, knit 2 in the other color pattern. And I'm going to turn this around. And you can see that we have these sections, like in between the contrasting color, there are these sections here, and you call those floats, because that's where the yarn that you're not using is floating behind your work. And you really don't want that to be too loose, because then you'll get an uneven stitch appearance to your work. So I'm now going to knit 1, and I'm now wrapping versus picking color, and 2 in the main color, and then 2, 1, 2 in the contrasting color. Alright, and now I'm going to turn my work and show you this on the wrong side, where I will be purling all the stitches. Okay, here we go. So if we take a look back at my chart, I did the first row, and I'm going to cover that up with this little blue slip of paper. And now for the second row, I'm going to go from right to left and make these little 2x2 squares. So I'm going to start by purling 2 in the blue, and now I am going to purl 2 in the gray, and see how I'm just pulling the yarn tight, because I don't, you don't want, if I were to start purling, it's not easy to show, you don't want to leave like a really long float like that. It's messy and it could catch on something and it's just not pretty. Likewise, you don't want to pull too tight because that could make the garment not fit. Colorwork items tend to be a little less stretchy than just a single color counterpart because of the way the floats are through the fabric. And so it takes a little trial and error to get to a tension that is consistent. So I just purled 2 in the gray, and now I'm going to purl 2 in the blue. And really it's just about, you have both yarns attached and you swap and use the color that works. And personally, I like to bring the new color I'm going to use over the previous yarn, but sometimes as things get super twisted, you can still bring it under as you're switching colors. At this stage where we're switching colors every 2 stitches, we don't really need to worry because the floats are really short. But in a couple of rows, I'll show you what we want to do as the floats get longer. Oh, and I guess I didn't point out, but as I passed the first stitch from where I'd secured the yarn, I pulled it a little bit just to bring the stitch and make that stitch even. But that's something that you can take care of when you weave in all your loose ends. And so here's the wrong side of the work, and you always want to have your floats, whether on the right side you want to knit or purl stitch, you want to carry the yarns over the back of the work because you don't want to see that on the right side of your fabric. Alright, and now that I've done these first 2x2 squares, I'm going to do a second set, alternating the colors. So here I'm going to start knitting 2 blue, and then I'm going to knit 2 gray, making sure to kind of maintain my tension as I go. Just like I was initially intimidated by cables, I was really intimidated by Colorwork before I tried it. And then once I tried it, I was like, oh, this isn't as hard as I expected. Really, it's knitting at the same time, but you just have 2 strands of yarn. And so you use your written instructions or your chart to help tell you which one to pick. But in a moment, I will get to a section where I can demonstrate what we would need to do if you're going to have a long section of one color, how to deal with that. But this is our little Colorwork swatch so far, along with the chart that I created for this project. We'll see how far I actually get. But I will have at some point in one of these rows a row where the wrong side is different. But you see, I like when there's a color change and it's a similar color that you've done before, I like to wrap the yarn under as I change, so that way, you know, the new yarn is under the yarn that I had already used. But when I'm knitting along the right side, I don't really pay as close attention to this. You can see I do try to bring the new yarn up and over the other one. And as I pull the new yarn, you can see I kind of pull to adjust the tension as needed. But if it's a project where you need to check your gauge, definitely knit a swatch with some stranded following your chart or the pattern a little bit, because my gauge for color work is very different, can be very different from my stockinette gauge while I'm knitting something else. In the next row I'm planning to knit today, there is suddenly this big stretch of a single color. This is 11 stitches of the main color yarn. And when you have a section this big, you could result in getting a really long float. And that can be hard to maintain your tension because you're trying to make sure that the yarn behind is long enough to cover 11 stitches, but not so long or so tight that it will affect your work. And so the way you can compensate for that is by twisting stitches as you go to help make the floats shorter. So I will show you how I do that here. So I'm going to do one, as I drawn out. Okay, now I'm going to do 11 stitches in main color. So normally you want to wrap your yarn every 5 to 6 stitches. You want to do one of these twists, but I'm going to do it every 3 to just better show it. After knitting 3 stitches, you can see how my long float is starting. You can wrap the secondary yarn kind of through the back of the color that you're knitting, and that kind of helps hold it in place. So now I'm going to knit another 3, and then I'll do it again. So depending on how the yarns are oriented with one another, but you're going to take the yarn and wrap it. You're going to take the secondary color and kind of twist it with the primary one, so that way you are securing this float behind your work. So I've done 9, I said I was going to do 11, and I'm going to do this again. And it's really only necessary to do this every 5 or 6 stitches. So with a stretch of 11 stitches, normally I would only do this once in the middle, but I wanted to do it more to just show you. And you can see how this yarn, this long float, is now neatly secured in between stitches, which will help you maintain your tension. And now for the last few stitches, I'm going to knit, what did I say, 2 contrasting, 3 main color, and then 1 there. So let me turn this around to show. So our long float is secured in between these stitches. And when I have a float, I try to vary and not wrap the stitch in between the same 2 stitches each time, because you don't want these wraps to start to like peek through on the right side, but normally that's not a problem. Let's go to the other side. Okay. Sorry that I can't have my chart in focus at the same time as my work, but that is a little difficult. Okay. So 1, and now I'm going to do 4 in the main color, and I don't need to twist it here. Oops. You can always twist, but you don't need to worry about that. Okay. And 1 in the main color, or sorry, 1 in the contrasting color. And now I'm going to get to my longer section, which this time I believe is 9 stitches. And as before, I'm going to wrap every 3 stitches instead of every 5 or 6, just to make things to have more chances to show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to purl 3 stitches, and now I'm going to wrap this unused yarn kind of around the yarn I'm knitting with, so that way it is secured. So you can see that rather than having one super long float, it's now tucked in between those stitches. So I knit 3 more, and I can wrap it. I can twist the yarns around each other again and knit my last 3. You just want to make sure you kind of pull it, not super taut, but you pull it before you switch to start knitting with the other color again. And here I am back to switching colors along my edge. See, you dealt with floats, and this is what the wrong side of the fabric looks like. But on here on the right side, we are starting to get a nice little pattern. So what are the main tricky things with color work? The tricky things are dealing with the long floats, and all you need to do is just twist your yarns around each other every few stitches, and they will be neatly secured on the back. And the other concern is your tension. And you want to pull the yarns tight, but not so tight that your yarn will start to gap on the front side. So you can tell if you're pulling it too tight if all of a sudden you see it start to like bunch and ripple a little bit like ribbed stitches. I hope that this video will help you out as you start knitting your own colorwork designs. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. Please let me know if you have any other questions.